Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for another look around the sports world, so let's do it. Let's start off with the topic that everybody's been talking about lately. The Cincinnati Reds manager, Bryan Price, dropped 77 F-bombs in a tirade laced at the media yesterday, and he was specifically talking to his own beat writers. And you can have whatever opinions you want. I use choice words a lot within my own family, within my own friends, in the right context. When we're angry, we drop words that probably shouldn't be said all the time. And you can have your own opinion on what words are inappropriate and not. It is widely considered that the F-bomb is not one of the words that you use in civilized society, unless you're among your friends or unless you're completely just out of your mind about a situation. But even then, you are kind of lowering yourself to a certain kind of denomination, what have you, when you choose to use that language. The issue that I take with Coach Price using that kind of language, it's not necessarily the language itself, but the fact that he's actually basing it towards his own beat writers. Because his argument, and he apologized later, you can agree with that or not, that's your own opinion as well. I think it was ultimately kind of silly to apologize because he came out, he had his opinion. It's not necessarily something you need to apologize for. Basically, he's apologizing because it got out. And I think those are the silliest apologies, but we'll leave that argument for another day. The issue becomes his main argument, taking the F word out of it completely, was he is completely angry that he gave a nugget of information to some of his beat writers, some of the people that cover his team on a day-in, day-out basis about injuries, and they turned around and reported it. Well, what did you think they were going to do? That is their job. They are not beholden to the team for employment. This is not some social media guru who is working for the Cincinnati Reds. These are reporters working for newspapers, working for TV stations, working for radio stations. That is their job. You are not their employer, Coach Price. It is not their job to sit there and kowtow to you and sit there and withhold all this information. And quite frankly, when it comes to professional sports, I'm sick of this idea that the public doesn't have a right to know who is injured and who is going to play that day. Because as a fan, that can alter whether I'm going to buy a ticket or not, because if a certain player is not going to be playing and I know it ahead of time, that gives me the right to choose whether I want to spend my hard-earned money to go watch that team on that day. As a fan who just wants to know what's going on with my particular team. Now, the Reds are not my particular team, but just interjecting myself into this situation, it is not that bad for us to know who is going to be playing that day. It has nothing to do with betting. It has nothing to do with all that kind of stuff, although those factors do weigh in for some people. For the vast majority of people, we just want to know who's going to be playing for our team, especially when it comes to like football and hockey and intensely physical sports. When you get to playoff time, you want to know who's going to be out there on the field of battle for your particular team. I understand this particular thinking style that if you're in that organization, you want the other team to have to scout for that player. You want them to have to waste time worrying whether or not that player is going to be in there. But these people are so skilled these days, so talented, that if the scouting department is wasting a little bit of time looking at one player and then they don't play, I don't think it makes that big a difference. So these reporters did their job. The manager has his panties in a twist. he needs to get used to the fact, otherwise he's not going to be a major league manager for very long. The other thing I addressed yesterday was Tim Tebow deserving a chance with the Philadelphia Eagles. He will get that chance in training camp, in OTAs, in practice, and all that. And I applaud Chip Kelly for giving him the opportunity to at least have another crack at an NFL start. The one thing that I found incredibly interesting, and it was posted on my Facebook, and I will put it in the description below, it was a link to a sports story on foxsports.com, and basically it kind of boiled the argument down to religion. And it's sad to think about, but Tim Tebow honestly makes people feel uncomfortable with his overzealous religious, I don't want to call it fanaticism because I don't think it is that, but basically he is a Christian version faux pas there, a Christian version of, basically he represents a lot of what makes us uncomfortable about faith in public. But the argument, and I thought was made very nicely, very professionally, not attacking one side or the other, was if you replace his religion with Islam, then all of a sudden none of these jokes are being made at Tim Tebow's expense. It's, we need to respect his religious beliefs and we need to allow him to do what he does. Nobody would have made fun of the Tim Tebowing because he was bowing to Mecca in respect for his performances. And that I find comical, that as a society it's okay to make fun of Christianity because we're comfortable doing that, and most of the people in our society are used to that and come from that kind of background. So it's okay to make fun of ourselves, but this unknown quantity, it's not okay to make fun of that. We need to be respectful. We need to be overly bowing towards that. That I think is ridiculous. Now I've gotten a little bit away from the sports side of it, but again, I'll put the link down there. It's a really interesting article. I do suggest you check it out. Lastly, let's talk about the NHL in an overall generalized sense. The NHL has become an interesting entity because more so than any other sport, it seems like the teams that are at the bottom end up doing so well in the playoffs. Now, this isn't a blanket statement because the Rangers are doing fairly well against Pittsburgh, and there are teams that do well when they are the higher seeds. But there's a certain quantity in the NHL that can't be quantified because it just boils down to that winning mentality. There are certain teams, the Chicago Blackhawks proved that they were one of those teams last night with a triple overtime win over the Nashville Predators. And the Chicago Blackhawks are just one of those teams where they find a way to get it done. They have their backup goaltender in there, a player who wasn't even on the team the entire year, but they find a way to get it done. They didn't have Patrick Kane, they'd find a way to get it done. The St. Louis Blues right now are not finding ways to get it done, despite the fact they were one of the best teams in the regular season all year. The Nashville Predators were one of the best teams in the regular season all year. They're not finding ways to get it done. It's just interesting to see this dichotomy of the way the teams play in the playoffs, because we've always said that the playoffs are the second season for the NHL. It really is an entirely different quantity, an entirely different season in terms of how the games are played, and it's just incredibly powerful, incredibly interesting to watch, frustrating from a personal standpoint, but as just an observer of hockey in general, it's incredibly interesting to watch, to see how these teams that can play so well in the regular season fall off the slide a little bit towards the playoffs, and these teams that struggle, like Chicago down the stretch, like Minnesota down for early portions of the season, and the LA Kings are the prime example, that they barely snuck into the playoffs in 2012, and they won a Stanley Cup that year. It's just really interesting to see how these teams find ways to win, yet teams that were at the top don't necessarily find those ways to win. And I think a lot of it falls on the idea that you have to fight so hard at the end of the year to get into the playoffs that you've already put yourself in that mindset. Whereas teams, regardless of whether they went into the playoffs on a winning streak or a losing streak, if they're at the top, they were a little bit too comfortable going in. That'll wrap up today's View from the Midwest. Comment, rate, and subscribe if you're watching on Facebook. Go to YouTube, do all those things, and share it around with your friends. Let's get these views rolling. Until the next time, I will see you then.